about Clement Lenglet, and there's been a lot of stories focusing on Lenglet over the last 48 hours. This one really does seem to be gathering pace. And the latest one actually was from a few minutes ago. It's from Sky Sports Lyle, he says Tottenham are in talks over a loan deal for Barcelona's Clement Lenglet. Spurs his most likely destination as it stands, but Tottenham still working on other left centre-back targets simultaneously, including Pau Torres. Fabrizio Romano says Lenglet is one of the players Tottenham have been offered to sign. Spurs will decide soon. He is a player they are discussing internally alongside other names for the defence. Shulagassi, who's a Barcelona correspondent, he says agreement is approaching between Barcelona and Tottenham for Lenglet. Spurs will pay between 5 and 6 million euros for a loan deal and a large portion of his wages. We got Roger Tello saying Lenglet to Spurs is on loan agreement is gaining momentum. A full agreement is yet to be reached, but this option is most feasible right now. And Santio Valley says the probable option as of right now for Lenglet is definitely a move to Tottenham on loan. So Tottenham loan deal for Lenglet, definitely hotting up, definitely one that seems to be in the pipeline. Not necessarily one that's guaranteed to happen if we get maybe another target through the door. It seems to be one that we're just looking at in case we don't get our real top targets. But in terms of a loan deal for Lenglet, I've been thinking about it in terms of if Gvardiol and Bastoni really are our top targets and they look to be completely unattainable this summer, is it worth maybe going for a loan deal with a view of next summer going a lot harder for Bastoni and Gvardiol, with Gvardiol potentially having a release clause next summer, which could be activated, and Bastoni maybe after another year in Inter Milan, he could be ready to move on. And so maybe Lenglet could be a good stopgap, or is it maybe not ambitious enough to be thinking about getting a stopgap for a loan, and we've got to really strike while the iron's hot while we have Conte now, and Lenglet doesn't fit that bill. What's your take on this potential Lenglet loan?
Yeah, Sim, I've done a lot of actually kind of research on this guy. I think I like the idea for what it's worth of signing him on a 1-year loan, and I can show you why in a minute. Well, we can drop into the stats on the screen.
Yeah.
On a comparisons over the last couple of years, he outperforms some of the major targets that we've been looking at that would cost 80 million. I think it's worth remembering about this guy that he was doing really well for Barcelona, doing very well for the French national team, and then he made a mistake. He made a couple of mistakes in the La Liga, and then he made one big mistake in the Champions League that cost Barcelona a game, and then he got booed off the pitch, and then he spent a couple of weeks or whatever on the subs bench, and when he was finally brought back on again, he was booed onto the pitch by the Barcelona, the unforgiving fans, and yet despite all of that, the stats that I'll show you in a minute are phenomenal, considering he's not brilliant at a couple of things. He's pretty poor in the air, which you could argue is a very important asset to have. But everything else he outperforms or is as good at as Bastoni and Gvardiol, who would cost you a lot of money. I do like the idea of getting this guy on loan, especially if you just need a hug. I feel like he would just need a hug, go to a club where he's going to be respected and appreciated, because it must have been, I think he cried. I think he was seen on camera crying, walking off the pitch at one point when he was booed off by the Barcelona fans. So it must be hard to take. But despite all that, he still continues to put a shift in when required. And I just think that what we could do is bring him in on a loan and then spend the next year or 12 months, 18 months, whatever it might take, to kind of nurture the relationship with Josep Gvardiol's representatives. Kind of like what happened with Haaland, right? That deal started 18 months ago with his late agent and his family. Mm-hmm. Man City were working that relationship for 18 months. I think with those sorts of size deals, you probably need to, put in the groundwork. I think the same happened with Luis Diaz at Liverpool. We came in late, tried to get it done, and that rushed Liverpool. But Liverpool had been, trying to work on that deal for a long time. And so I feel like maybe Lenglet could be a very good, very solid stopgap for a year, whilst in the next year, Paratici goes and tries to tap up and figure out a way to get Gvardiol, who's just signed a 5-year extension on his deal. And the release clause is going to be, I think, £45 million, which is obviously deliberately low, probably trying to go down the whole Haaland route where the release clause was low, but it means that there's more money available for agents' fees and family members and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, in terms of Lenglet, I think you're right. Into like, I remember I was looking a few years ago. I remember when we played them in the Champions League. I think he was playing that day, but I think at that time he was playing pretty well for them. And I think he was like there was 1 year he was actually really super consistent, and
Yeah.
he was like, having a really good time. But the Barca fans were really happy with him. I didn't know all this stuff about him being booed off the pitch and all these specific moments, and that definitely that can happen. We've seen it before with other players where they something happens between them and the fan base, and the fans don't really forgive them for one reason or another, and then they can struggle for confidence, and they can struggle for how they perform and stuff like that, and they go into a negative spiral. Maybe that's what's been happening with Clement Lenglet. Whenever I've seen him when he's been playing well, I think he's a really talented defender. I think he's a really good player in terms of when he plays out the back. I think his ball playing ability is really strong. So I think if we can get him to top form, maybe that's one that we would be silly to turn up our noses at if it is a case of of getting him on loan. But
do you want to see his stats quickly, Sim?
Yeah, let's bring up his stats. Let's get a comparison going.
Okay. Let me know when you got the screen up, and I'll.
Oh, there you go. Let's show.
All right. So I can't see. Can you see everything?
Is it on me to add it because I control the stream? Is that how?
Yeah, you have to add it, but I've got it available to be added.
Okay, so add to stream. What happens if I do that? No, I have to. 1 sec. How do I do this? I have to take away the background, I think. Let's see that.
And then click on that. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, there we go. That was a bit.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Inception. Okay, so let's. I've just got up just for argument's sake, and I've done the last 2 years, right? The last. So the season has just finished, in the season before, and I've just used for the purposes of comparison. Or Ben Davies shouldn't be in there twice, but let me get rid of him. Hang on 1 second.
That's all right.
So I've got Ben Davies, Clement Lenglet, Bastoni, and Gvardiol and Pau Torres, the four most likely candidates of players that we're linked to over this summer. I'm just going to toggle by 90 minutes on everything so that we can see a fair comparison. 2 seconds.
It's all right.
Okay. So this is over the last 2 years, right? So the 2021 season and the 21-22 season. And you can see that the matches played is kind of within a fair standard deviation of the norm. I'm not going to worry about the standard stats. Not going to worry about shooting so much. But we'll start with passing, just because I think as a left-sided centre-back, it's pretty important to be able to pass the ball out and move the ball progressively forward. And if I start with just on passes completed every single game or per 90 minutes, Clement Lenglet is more successful than Gvardiol, Bastoni, Pau Torres. And this is obviously the baseline, the benchmark, what we're looking at right here with Ben Davies. So Ben Davies is
that's per 90, number of passes, right? Yeah, he makes more passes.
Number of passes per 90, right?
Yeah.
And then if we look at the actual completion ratio, now I think on average, if you're looking at a midfielder, the average midfielder is sort of 75 to 80 is what is about the bare minimum for a defender, because they're under less pressure. It's about 85 to 88 is what's considered like in the 80 percentile. But Clement Lenglet has a 92.3% completion of his passes, which is a significant difference compared to everybody else. Just for what it's worth, if we're worried not about him passing around the back, if we're actually worried about whether or not these guys, how good they are passing the ball forward, progressive distance. So Gvardiol, who, like I say, he's got, as of now, a £45 million buy clause, but in reality, it's probably going to cost you 80 million quid to get him if he was even likely to get. He slightly wins this one, but Clement Lenglet is ahead of Pau Torres and Bastoni quite significantly per 90 minutes, and obviously Ben Davies. And I don't even think it's unreasonable to say that Ben Davies, as a left-sided centre-back, is not unusually found passing the ball forward. I think he does.
No, yeah, he is,
definitely progress the ball forward. Right, but Clement Lenglet is about 60% an improvement on the yards of Ben Davies. So, and then just quickly, just having a look if it's worth looking at. Let me zoom out a little bit. Clement Lenglet wins on the short passes. He wins on the medium length passes, which is up to, I think, 30 meters. And then anything longer than 30 meters in terms of completion, he still is the best of the bunch. So his passing, just quickly, just to summarize his passing, essentially is he takes on the most passes of any of these other names that we're looking at. Pau Torres, obviously, Bastoni, Gvardiol, Ben Davies, but has got a higher completion percentage than any of them, both in short, medium, and long passes. And long passes, we're talking about pinging the ball either from the left side across to the right side, or maybe pinging it forward to the right wing forward or towards a Richarlison in this scenario that we're trying to think of next season. And just also, yeah, go on. Sorry, mate.
I was going to say, I was looking at key passes because the only reason I look at that is because what we know that the reason why I look at key passes is because we know that under Conte, it wouldn't be a rare that it's not too much of a rare occasion to see someone like Ben Davies in the final third on a given game. So. True. So I would like to. So I was interested to see if he's used to making passes which which lead to shots and stuff like that. Seems as though he's not too good at that one, but maybe.
Well, he's fourth out of all five, right? But you got to remember that a key pass essentially is just a pass that leads to a shot, and so it's not necessarily. I mean, yes, you could argue that Gvardiol, and listen, Gvardiol is obviously my number one pick. If we could get him now, I'd do anything to get him. But there's not a huge amount of difference between the two. But if you look at them, like key passes, even Josko Gvardiol is only involved in a pass that leads to a shot 4 times in every 10 games. So it's not like any of them are really, succeeding or exceeding in that.
I would say as well, it's no surprise that the 2 at the bottom are, I think, the ones that play in a back 4. The other 3 play in a back 3, I think. So that probably also has definitely something to do with it.
Yeah. And of course, these stats, just for what it's worth, anyone that's in the comments is probably rolling their eyes saying stats mean nothing. Of course, we have to take into context, the actual context that, Lenglet's playing for a Barcelona team. And when he plays for Barcelona, they're not going to be a team that's under pressure all that much. And some of those stats will be highlighted in a moment. And people like Gvardiol, when he's playing for Leipzig, maybe that's you have to factor in, I guess, that the quality of the opposition and the style of play that the teams are kind of incorporating. So the stats don't mean anything really when you just look at them directly, but if you factor in context, I still think, as you'll come to see in a second, Sim, that Lenglet is so much better than people give him credit for. Just the last one I wanted to talk about on passing is the progressive passes per 90. So there's progressive passes is any pass that moves forward 10 yards and gets in towards the from the last 40% of the pitch. So essentially from the halfway line or from the edge of the defensive center circle all the way in, how many passes per 90 is he making that move forward 10 yards, which aligns with the progressive distance. So he's hitting his 514.9 meters, not entirely but in no small part because of him being involved predominantly in the last third of the pitch or in the opposition half, and he's moving that forward significantly more times than someone like Ben Davies does every game that he plays. So as a passer,
pass into the final third as well, very strong.
Very, very strong. Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's the other one. Yeah,
7.74. Yeah, it's also really strong. Look at that.
Yeah.
It breezes everyone else. Makes a lot of passes into the final third.
Twice as many as we currently have with our boy Ben Davies, right? And I like Ben Davies. I think he had a fantastic season. So, just keep this in mind. And then I just want to, we can look at this if you want to go into more detail, just for what it's worth. Like Clement Lenglet, he's not someone that has his stats padded by taking free kicks or corners or anything like that. He doesn't. It's all from live open play. And he's very successful with both his ground passes, as much as anything else. The one thing I want to call out right now, I'm not going to sit here and wax lyrical about him. There's absolute negatives, and he's very bad in the air. Well, not very bad in the air. He's comparatively not as good in the air as the other boys, Bastoni, Torres, Gvardiol, and Ben Davies. He only wins 55% of the duels, and he participates in about the middle of the range. So there is a weakness to Clement Lenglet. But and then just quickly, mate, I don't want to spend any more than a few minutes on this because I know this is probably boring for a lot of people. But if we look at tackles per 90, here we go. Here's an interesting thing. Against people that are dribbling against him, right? So the right wing forward, if the right wing forward of the opposition gets the ball and dribbles at Ben Davies only wins 1 in every 3 of the players that dribble against him. So Cristiano Ronaldo or a Salah, whoever it might be, he only wins 1 in 3. Bastoni tops this one, but actually they're exactly the same. Bastoni and Lenglet win more than they don't win against dribblers, which is a very underrated stat. Yep. And then quickly, in terms of pressures, again, how many pressures are you putting on the opposition per 90? Gvardiol, number one, but only just. And, Ben Davies is pretty good as well. But people that are waxing lyrical about Pau Torres is woefully underperforming when it comes to the amount of pressures per 90. And despite Lenglet and Gvardiol being almost indecipherable when it comes to the difference here, when you look at the actual percentages, Clement Lenglet, he might do slightly less, but he actually wins slightly more. He does more in the defensive third. He does the second most in the midfield third, and he's slightly less used to, I guess, doing that stuff in the attacking third. And like I say, in terms of tackles won, just generally overall. There's not a huge amount of difference between the four of them. The only one that stands out here is Pau Torres is particularly weak in tackling and tackling one. So Pau Torres, I think that a lot of people will think we should have got Pau Torres. When you factor in that the guy turned us down twice, turned us down last season. He didn't want to play for a team that didn't play in the Champions League. And this season he turned us down because he'd rather go to Manchester United, who aren't playing in the Champions League. Like, forget that fella, especially when you look at his stats, and his stats are the bottom of the barrel of all of these 4 or 5 different players we're looking at. I don't know if that's enough. We can carry on going, but if it's enough for you to get the point, Clement Lenglet is not someone that we should sniff at. He's very, very good with his ability to move the ball forward. He's
in terms of one more thing, in terms of like carries and dribbles, I know that's quite a big thing for like the wide centre back. So that might be something interesting to look at quickly. Is there possession? I think.
Where is it?
Where is it? I just saw it.
I shoot past it. Possession. Here we go.
There you go.
So carries per 90. He's the number one carrier. Total distance, number one. Let's highlight him so we can see it. Progressive distance, number one in carries. In the actual progression, 8.8.
Oh wow, he's way ahead of everyone there.
Way ahead of everybody else. He's just slightly second behind Ben Davies in the final third of the pitch. Carries into the 18-yard box. He's a little bit. He doesn't necessarily go all the way, but I don't know, man. Like I say, I just feel like he's number one or number two on pretty much every meaningful stat. And the only person that he really competes with overall is Josko Gvardiol. I'm not saying that we don't want Gvardiol. If we can get him, amazing. Bastoni is pretty solid, right? And I've, for what it's worth, I've done this same comparison with these same players and then compared them to people like Ndicka, compared to Hincapia. I put Bremer in there. I had Sven Botman in there before he moved to Newcastle. Lenglet, stat for stat, over the last 2 years, is literally first or second. Ndicka actually also outperforms, which is someone that I wouldn't mind coming in if we can get him in. He's actually someone that also very, very good at these stats. But Josko Gvardiol probably takes the biscuit. He's probably number one overall, but Lenglet's just slightly behind him. So
interesting.
I don't know if that makes sense to everyone or if it's interesting or if they don't care about stats, but
there we go.
I'll get it now.
All right, let's get the 1 sec. Get that back up. Look, that was actually very enlightening in terms of how, and I thought how good Lenglet actually is, and I think people maybe take his time at Barcelona and think because he struggled maybe in the latter stages over the last year or so that he isn't worth looking at. But I think surely you've got to think as well. We've literally just had evidence right in front of our very eyes in 2 players, in Bentancur and Kulusevski, who were literally ready to be chucked away by Juventus. The Juventus fans weren't interested in him. And we saw enough in them to think they could improve our team, and they're flying at the moment. So isn't that enough evidence to show that we shouldn't just write off a player just because he's currently struggling?
Yeah, 100%, mate, 100%. And I guess it depends how you feel about Paratici. A lot of people think he's the Don. A lot of people still think he's a con. But I'm of the opinion you have to look retrospectively. I don't think we had the right to judge the transfer window in its entirety on January the 31st. I think we had to wait, and now we can look back, and most people would look back now. Most reasonable people would look back now and think it was a very successful window because Paratici, whether he used his Italian connections or not, but he did find 2 players that have absolutely been instrumental in being the difference. And I think that Lenglet could just be the guy who surprises everyone a little bit more than Bentancur or Kulusevski did. I'm not saying that it's our first choice. I know that it's not our first choice. I know Bastoni was. I know that Guardiola's probably unrealistic. But for all the people out there that are saying Lenglet is not for me, he makes too many mistakes. Those stats they tell us tale despite the fact that the entire Barcelona fan base went toxic on him after a couple of mistakes. And we're all human. Can you imagine what he could do if he came to a club where we collectively put our arms around him and said, "You're welcome here, bro. You're part of the family, and we want you to succeed." I think that you might see a player that could take everybody by surprise.
Yeah, those stats as well. It's a good point. Those stats are from his weakest point as well. So potentially, if you probably went back a few years, maybe they'll be even stronger. Those stats. But I think you make a good point on Lenglet. I remember we linked with him in January, and I said I really like him. And I think if we could get him in, potentially he could surprise a lot of people because I think he's a very talented defender. And those stats back it up. So I think I don't think we just sniff if we do get him in. However, clearly he's very clearly not our first choice. That's obvious. I think we can all see that. So I just think a lot of fans would maybe be frustrated with the fact that we're getting in a player yet again who might not be our first choice, and that is a sign of not being ambitious or whatever. But you know what, Kulusevski wasn't our first choice. Bentancur wasn't our first. I'm not sure Bentancur was even our first choice. So
no.
I think people have to, if we do get him in, maybe should be excited about what he can do and not be disappointed about who he isn't. I think that's how we got to look at it.
100%. The only thing I would say, like, I'm not going to wax lyrical about him and say he's perfect. He's definitely not. He's imperfect. His heading, I said before, is weak, right? So if Ben Davies actually does have very solid headed, clear, like his heading stats last season were deceptively strong, and I think that what we probably need to do if we're going to bring Lenglet in and he plays, we probably wouldn't be amiss of us to go and find somebody who can play in the central centre back to give Ben Davies Eric Dyer a little bit of competition, who's a bit more aerially pronounced, because Christian Romero or QT Romero, as much as we all love him, he's an absolute beast. With the ball at his feet or with the ball at somebody else's feet, you won't find a more aggressive and more successful centre back, and I can't wait to see what he's like next season. It's going to be insane. However, Romero isn't great in the air either. If you're going to pick a weakness in Romero, it's probably in the air. If you're going to pick a weakness with Lenglet, it's probably in the air, which leaves a lot of responsibility on either the right and left wing back to be able to do a job. And as much as everyone doesn't like, or most people don't like Emerson Royale aerially last season was exceptional when it came to clearing corners, which is an area that we would often concede goals from in summers gone by. So for me, if we're going to change up our right wing back and we're going to lose the aerial strength of Emerson, and we're going to bring in Lenglet, who's weaker in the air than Ben Davies, and we've still got Romero, who's not great in the air yet, we probably need to find somebody in the central side who is a beast in the air. And is that although Bremer is probably not going to come to Tottenham sim. Bremer's an absolute beast. He's like an Adama Traore looking fella, without the Vaseline, but he's also an absolute monster in the air. So if there's a way that we can get Torino to play ball with us, and if we can find a way to kind of gazump Inter whilst they're waiting on whatever else they want to do to make the decisions, then I think Bremer would be a fantastic addition to our squad. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Ali Gold said that apparently if we are looking at Lenglet potentially to either play the left and also cover the centre as well. So maybe that's something to look at. And I do think as well, when it comes to the wide centre backs, I don't think it's 100% imperative. All three of them are amazing in the air. Obviously, it's a bonus if they are. But I think we've seen with Romero, when he's partnered with Davis and Dyer, who are both quite good in the air, as you say, it doesn't become that imperative. Obviously, maybe the question is, if there's too many of them who aren't good in the air, does it become a problem potentially? But I do think if Lenglet comes in and he's playing a wide centre back, it might not be as important to be as dominant in the air in a back three as it would be in a back two. That's for sure. So yeah, look, that's Clement Lenglet. That's quite interesting. I for one wouldn't be too against getting him through the door if we can't get other targets in, but it just shows what he could potentially bring for us, which is interesting. Bye.